in that moment that we are communicating on behalf of that loved one in the spirit world, we enter into a spiritual reality where the boundaries or limitations of our minds um, evaporates. We start to live in their world. We take on their personality, their emotional states, their characteristics, their traits.
As the medium, it's an incredibly privileged place to be, and it's something I don't ever take for granted. I don't think anybody can take it for granted. Because if we do, we fail to see each and every person in the spirit world as a person. And some of what we have heard spirit people described as personally makes me feel quite sad. When people in the spirit world are reduced to figures or energy or something of that like. To me, they're somebody's loved one, they're somebody's friend, they're somebody's relative, partner, child, colleague. They're not anything other than a living person that no longer has a physical body. So each and every time I meet somebody in the spirit world, I greet them in my heart with that acknowledgement that they are a person.
We immerse ourselves into who they are. We start to see images, but it's not just we see images and we have to sort of symbolize what they mean. As we've actively gone into those expressions and impressions, we start to live them. We automatically know what they mean, and we tell a story of life. We don't give facts or we don't give details and say, that must mean something to you. We're actually living the experience, so we know what it means because we're moved emotionally, mentally, and physically in that moment. And we lose self in there. All our inhibitions, self-limiting beliefs, all our worries, all those things that we may think about, is it good enough? Are we doing the best work that we can? All that dissipates, it all disappears because we're living a real reality, if you will, even though it's a spiritual reality. We're living it, and it really impresses upon the mind to give it a physical reality as well. And it's how the mind, or should I say how the brain, accepts those impressions from the spirit world, because we can tangibly feel them through the emotional states. We physically feel them through the physical being of the body. And also because we're being impressed maybe audiently, we actually feel like we're hearing it within the ear. But actually, it is all subjective, it is all internal. So it is a real internal world of expression.
Now, it might sound really strange for me to have to say, I greet them as a person, but I do that because I want that person in the spirit world to know I know they are an individual, that they matter to somebody here. Too often, when individuals go to the spirit world, mediums reduce them to facts and figures and details, information, and refrain from making it a personal experience. For me, I become completely immersed in that person's experience. I trust that the evidence they're bringing is the evidence that they want to talk about that day. Might sound obvious, but I accept that evidence is particularly chosen for that communication. Knowing if I were to read that person another time, the evidence would become different because the reason that they've come is different. So for me, greeting that person individually is incredibly important. I then embrace that experience and that understanding, because as I move to a place where I completely see and feel them, for me that experience completely leaves itself a very spiritual experience.
Where the communicator can impress their evidence through us what they need to tell their story. But as we look at that situation of what's taking place, as the medium, we can often sometimes afterwards say, well, I didn't get this and I didn't get that. Well, we have to really understand, was that evidence there? Was it given by the communicator? I remember many years ago doing a contact for somebody that disappeared on the Malaysia aircraft, that disappearance, that disaster. And I often wondered afterwards, why did I not get the aeroplane? I got all the situations around it. It was only speaking to the recipient afterwards where they said they couldn't face the actual knowledge of what happened to the plane. So all of a sudden, I realized then at that point, the communicator knew how their loved one felt and purposely withheld that. And it opened my eyes to the understanding that the spirit world gives us what we need. They're also very conscious of how the recipient is feeling. So when we're living within this immersive world, this spirituality, this real spiritual awareness, we've got to surrender to it and allow that impression to take place, to gain its full understanding, allowing it to move us and allowing us to move the mind to where it needs to be, to tell the story exactly how it's meant to be. Not to stop and start, not to ask questions, not to hold those impressions externally and say, this must mean something to you, would that make sense? We often hear mediums saying, well, what I'm being told, and would that make sense to you? Well, that shows they're not immersed in that spiritual reality. They're not in the essence of the communicator, because it should be a walk down memory lane where you're telling the story of life, you're living that life, you're seeing that life through their eyes, and we're actually in a very honourable place because we're feeling and understanding what they're trying to express, not just through the evidence they're giving, but we get the meaning of that evidence. We get the understanding and how it will be landing for the recipient when they hear it. It's almost we get the emotional content within it that helps us, if you will, steer or be steered by the loved one into the direction they wish to convey their evidence and their story.
I don't want to keep that person at arm's length. I don't want to leave them away from me and feeling like they're not close. Mediumship is about sharing my space with them, allowing them to come into my space and for them to share their experience with me. Often mediums hold the spirit world at a distance and speak about their experience as something that they're observing from miles away. I like to see a medium work from a space where they're speaking about a reality of themselves. They're speaking about something that is completely real to them. And that's where I like to work from. And I believe every spiritual medium should be working that way.
When we start to see this immersed world, this spiritual reality, truly, we know that it's done definitely to inspire. We know that it's done to comfort people and help people find peace, not just proving that we live beyond the physical body when we pass over, when we die. It's actually to show them that they're still around, they're still wanting to communicate, that they're still loving us. And in some cases, when we're so immersed in the contact, the recipient might be thinking at one moment, oh, I love you, and for example, Mum. And at that point, that expression goes to the spirit world. The spirit world reply and say, I love you too. And it's really touching to be in that cycle, if you will, that triangle of the recipient, the loved one, and being the medium, how that expression of love takes place. But it's a really, really privileged place to be when we're physically here, but yet the mind's in a different reality. The mind is a different consciousness. It's being impressed with purpose. And to immerse yourself in that reality is quite overwhelming at times, where we get to see somebody else's insight of life. It makes you really question what life is about. It affects you as the medium, not just giving the evidence and having the privilege of communicating. It changes your outlook of how your mind perceives the life that we live. We start to take on their, if you will, morals and ethics. We start to question ourselves, and then it helps you spiritualize. And when I say that, I mean we spiritually grow. We start to gain understanding and empathy of how people are, how people see lives.
I'm immersing myself in that other person's life, and I'm allowing myself to completely be present. When that happens, something very special happens within the mediumship, because we allow ourselves to be open and receptive. For that to happen, we have to be able to do that with people in this world. So if somebody has difficulty in expressing their emotions to people close to them, or that emotional intelligence that allows them to talk about what they're feeling, why they're feeling it, and what this means for them, they're going to find it difficult in many ways to be able to do that on behalf of a spirit person. Because a spirit person brings their emotions. As a medium, I need to understand that emotion, experience that emotion, and then express what that emotion means. So if I have any difficulty in going close to my own emotions, I'm clearly going to have difficulty in going close to anybody else's. So that personal development aspect of venturing close to those ouchy parts, or those parts of us that have a really painful memory. I'm not saying that I go back and relive that experience, but I go back and have a look at it with a fresh set of eyes, a fresh perspective and a different lens that lets me understand that experience in a different way. It's cathartic for me, and it also means I can use that experience in the mediumship.
In a way, it's almost like a very intense personal development or journey that we go on, because it makes us reflect. It allows us to see where our intent sits within those thoughts. It shows that the real intelligence that's taking place in these moments is really overwhelming. It really shows us how that interaction's taking place, how the human mind can be two places at once, where even now I'm talking to yourself, but yet I'm being impressed by that intelligent world, how to explain things, how to say things. And it affects the mannerisms of who we are. It affects our personality. It affects the mindset, our heart set, and our soul set with the intent. There's a real change within the personality of the medium, because we're taking on their impressions, we're taking on their thoughts, their world, the impression that they want to convey. So as a medium, it doesn't just affect us in the way of our minds and how we're impressed. It affects us in such a way that it moves us totally, our whole being. It's an immersive world within a world. It is something that is truly magnificent, and how it impresses upon us, I don't think words can really convey.
If a medium's unwilling to become completely immersed because they're worrying how they look, or whether they're getting it right, or whether they're good enough, or whether they have any right to be a medium, or whether they're scared of getting caught in the emotions of the communicator, or worried about not understanding what the communicator's meaning, any part of that experience removes them from being immersed in the spirit person's experience. Because we cannot be in that feeling space and in a thinking space of our own at the same time. If I take you on an emotional journey and ask you to do a calculation at the same time, it's very, very difficult to do both. You end up moving from a feeling space into a thinking space, and you will explain from an intellectual place the emotion, because you can't stay in that feeling space. It's vitally important as a medium that we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to be brave, to have courage, to be honest, and for us to be authentic. If we don't know who we are whilst being authentic and vulnerable, then we will not know what it feels like for the spirit person to be vulnerable and authentic with us.
It is a pleasure, it is an honour, but also it's such a learning with each communication, because we're seeing a world through somebody else's eyes. And each time we do, for the 8 billion people that are here in this world right now living, we have the same number, if not more, in the spirit world. And to live each one of those lives, we're taking a different insight. And that's quite overwhelming when you think about it. 8 billion people's views of the world and how we interact with them and how we learn from those interactions. So for me, medium, we have the title of medium, but actually there's a spiritualization or a spiritual sense taking place. It's about the mastery of understanding self, the mastery of understanding somebody else. I often hear people talking about they do this work to help others. Well, we must help ourselves before we can help another person. And it's through these contacts, through these impressions, through these images, through these words that we hear that have a profound effect and allow us to live almost a dual life. One through our own eyes, where we're learning through this world, but how others have learnt through their lives in the way that they perceive life as well.
They have to share some of their most private moments, personal moments, emotional moments. If we can't do that for ourselves, how could we expect a spirit person to do that with us if they are not aware of what our emotional experience might be? So for me to be on the platform demonstrating, or to be in a private reading, I lose feeling, I lose concept, I lose awareness of this world, and I become completely immersed in the spirit person's world. And for that moment, I'm not Kerry MacLeod. My personality still will be there for presentation, but inwardly, I'm completely enveloped and immersed in the experience and the life of the person I'm communicating for. If I go to the spirit world tomorrow, I want to know that there is a medium that can completely understand who I am. When I share all of myself with them, I want to know that they can fully experience all of that, because it requires that for them to be able to communicate on behalf of me. So it's a very, very privileged space to be able to work from, and a very special place to be able to work within.